Commander Fresh's voice came back broken and distant, cutting in and out through sheets of interference. Negative, Krenth. Facility is rigged to blow. Multiple detonations detected throughout the structure. Full retreat is authorized. Get to the rally point or... Commander, I cannot walk. I need... A second explosion, closer than the first, severed the transmission with a wall of static. And then, from somewhere above me, I heard something that would haunt me for years, the thunder of armored boots moving away. 12 pairs of boots, growing quieter, growing distant, retreating. I tried to crawl. I made it perhaps 3 meters before the pain folded me in half and deposited me against a support pillar, gasping and shaking. My medical readout was delivering its assessment in calm, implacable terms. Compound fracture, internal bleeding, possible spinal compression. Without medical intervention, it projected 2 hours before blood loss and shock completed what the explosion had started. The emergency lighting pulsed red around me, casting everything in a bloody glow. Dust settled slowly through the air, and in that terrible silence, with the retreating footsteps of my brothers fading into nothing, the reality of my situation became impossible to avoid. I had been left behind. That was when I heard the footsteps. Soft, careful, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had learned to move quietly in dangerous places. Not the heavy, purposeful stride of a Valorian warrior. Not the scurrying, furtive movement of Crexith fighters caught off guard. Something else entirely. The figure that emerged from the smoke was human. He was perhaps 50 standard years old, with gray threading through dark hair and a face that bore the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent decades in recycled air and artificial light. He wore a maintenance jumpsuit covered in laid grease stains that told the story of years of honest, unglamorous work. In one hand, he carried a battered toolbox. In the other, an emergency medical kit. He surveyed the scene of devastation around him, the collapsed floor, the scattered debris, the groaning support structure, and the badly wounded Valorian warrior slumped against a pillar, with a calm, slightly exasperated expression of man who has found, once again, that the universe has exceeded his expectations for inconvenience. "Well," he said, with a casual air of someone commenting on unexpected rain, "this is just fantastic. Really top-notch military operation you folks have been running here." I stared at him. Through the pain, through the shock, through the chemical haze of trauma suppressants, I could only stare. Every hierarchy I had ever been taught, every instinctive categorization of the galaxy's species, struggled to process what I was seeing, a human maintenance worker, standing in an active combat zone, with medical kit and apparently no intention whatsoever of being afraid. "Stay back." I managed, reaching by reflex for my sidearm. My hand closed on empty air. The weapon was gone, lost somewhere in the fall. "I am Valorian military. I do not require assistance from your kind." "Oh, sure. He walked toward me anyway, already kneeling, already opening the medical kit with practiced efficiency. "You're doing great on your own. Really selling the whole independent warrior aesthetic, with that bone sticking out of your leg there. Very compelling." I said, "Stay back." "Yeah, I heard you the first time. Buddy." He did not look up from what he was doing. "Name's Marcus Webb, maintenance chief. Or I was, before you military geniuses decided to turn my workplace into a demonstration of what happens when explosives meet load-bearing walls. Now hold still, because I'm going to have to set that leg, and it is going to hurt considerably more than it already does." The indignity of it burned somewhere beneath the physical pain. A human was offering to help me. Not just any human. A maintenance worker, a man who unclogged pipes and replaced air filters, offering medical assistance to a third-ranked champion of the Valorian Imperium. The wrongness of it was almost dizzying. I knew humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy knew humans. They were everywhere these days, spreading across the star systems with a cheerful, unstoppable persistence of particularly adaptable weed. They ran cargo haulers and managed mining stations and operated trade outposts at the edges of explored space. Useful enough for certain categories of work, I suppose, the unglamorous categories, the mechanical and administrative and logistical work that empires needed done but preferred not to think about. Commander Thresh had a joke about them. Humans are what happens when evolution gives up halfway through and decides to call it close enough. We had all laughed at that joke too. "I will wait for my own people." I said through gritted teeth. They will return for me. Marcus paused in his preparations and looked at me directly for the first time. His expression was difficult to read. It occupied some complicated territory between pity and gentle understanding that somehow managed to be worse than either one alone. "Kid," he said quietly, and the kindness in his voice made the word sting. "I watched your squad pile into their drop pods about 3 minutes ago. They're already back in orbit." The words landed like a second explosion. Left behind, the Crimson Talons, brothers bound by honor and shared blood, the finest rapid assault unit in the fleet, had left me to die in a collapsing mine. Another detonation shook the facility, closer than before. Dust and fragments rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper in the complex, metal groaned under pressures it was never designed to handle, and the sound of escaping atmosphere began, a thin, persistent hiss that meant structural integrity was failing on a fundamental level. Marcus' tone shifted. The gentle exasperation became something sharper, more urgent. "All right. Philosophy and feelings will have to wait, because this entire facility is coming down around us, and I have a strong preference for not being inside it when that happens. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stabilize that leg so you can move. You're going to set down whatever pride you have left, and we are both going to get out of here. Any questions?" "I don't need." That was rhetorical. He was already working. "Brace yourself. 3, 2. He did not reach one. He simply grabbed my leg and pulled. The scream that tore from my throat was not dignified. It was not the controlled, measured expression of pain that Valorian warriors are taught to offer battle. It was raw and helpless and entirely beyond my ability to suppress. Stars detonated behind my eyes. For 3 seconds, the universe consisted of nothing except white agony. Then, gradually, it diminished to something merely unbearable. "Sorry about that," Marcus said, already wrapping my leg in quick-setting polymer from the medical kit. He did not sound particularly sorry. "I find that counting down just makes people tense up. Better to simply act. This cast will hold for maybe 4 to 5 minutes under ideal conditions." He glanced around at the collapsing facility with pointed emphasis. "Given that these are approximately the opposite of ideal conditions, I'd call it 30 before you're in serious trouble again. So I suggest we move." He pulled me upright with surprising strength for someone who outmassed him by 60 kilograms. His grip was steady, his stance practiced, and his expression communicated clearly that he was not interested in waiting for my cooperation. "Come on, big guy, lean on me. We have a very narrow window to not become part of the geological record of this rock." "This is your day off," I said, half-dazed. "What?" "You said you came in to get a calibrator from your locker." "Yeah." He was already half carrying me toward a side corridor I should have slept in. Story of my life, honestly. What followed was the most surreal experience of my military career, and I have survived engagements that included orbital bombardment and hand-to-hand combat in zero gravity. Marcus Webb dragged me through that disintegrating facility like a man who had decided, through sheer stubbornness, that the laws of physics were negotiable. Every few meters, as another support structure failed or another section of ceiling descended toward us, he would mutter observations under his breath with the weary professionalism of someone who has seen too many equipment failures to be surprised by them anymore. "Oh, wonderful, the support beams are melting. That's just perfect. Oh, who designed this junction? Drunk engineers? Actual children? Both?" The tunnels were nightmares of smoke and sparks. Power conduits severed by the blast rain showers of blue light across our path. The floor buckled and heaved. Behind us, the sound of destruction advanced like a living thing. Each explosion closer than the last, a countdown that seemed to have a definite end but a flexible schedule. "Left here," Marcus gasped, hauling me around a corner a fraction of a second before the corridor behind us folded inward with a sound like breaking bones, floor and ceiling meeting in a crumpled embrace where I had just been standing. "You knew that was about to go," I said. "I designed the maintenance schedule for that junction. The load-bearing supports have been failing for 8 months. I put in 6 separate maintenance requests. Nobody approved the budget." His voice carried a particular flatness that was somehow more expressive than anger. Turns out they didn't need to worry about the long-term structural integrity after all. He stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall, ran his hands along the surface with the unhurried confidence of a man reading familiar text. found something invisible to my eyes, and pushed. A concealed panel swung inward to reveal a narrow shaft descending into darkness. "After you," he said. "That goes down. We need to reach the surface." Yes, you see, that's a kind of tactical thinking that gets people killed in environments like this. He was already lowering himself into the shaft. "All the direct routes up are currently on fire, crushed, or both. Your 3-galaxy empire's handiwork, I should note. This maintenance shaft connects to the geothermal sublevel, which connects to the emergency evacuation tube, which goes directly to the surface. Longer path. Significantly more live path. I'm calling it a win." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse. But another explosion, near enough to wash heat across my scales even through my damaged armor, made a decision on my behalf. I lowered myself into the shaft after him, folding my Valorian frame into a space that had been designed for human proportions and clearly not taking visitors of my stature into account. The descent was agony, my broken leg protesting each rung with specific, articulate fury, but Marcus guided me, called out warnings from below, steadied me when my grip slipped. "So," he said conversationally, as we descended into the bowels of a disintegrating facility, "what actually brought you folks here today? Was it something we said? Did someone leave a bad review on the Galactic Network?" This was a Crexith operation, a confirmed military target. "Right. And the 4 to 7 civilian workers who were here this morning? The ones who had maybe 20 minutes warning before your squad dropped in. Standard evacuation protocols. Take 30 minutes, minimum, on a facility this size. On a good day, with all the evacuation equipment functioning. You gave us 20. His voice was even. Not accusatory, precisely. Just stating a fact in the way someone states an equation. 3 of our crew didn't make it to the pods in time. They evacuated through maintenance tunnels and got out, as it happens, but not because of anything your protocols accounted for. I had no response. The thought had genuinely not occurred to me. Civilians had not been my concern. My mission parameters had been clear, and everything outside those parameters had existed in a category I had never bothered to examine. In the silence that followed, something small and uncomfortable settled into my awareness and refused to leave. The geothermal sublevel hit us like opening an oven door. Massive turbines filled the chamber, their housings shuddering, their systems failing. The ones still operational screamed like wounded creatures. The air shimmered visibly with heat, and my armor's thermal regulators, already compromised by the earlier blasts, began issuing urgent warnings that I elected to ignore because the alternative was worse. Marcus checked the wall panel, swore with quiet creativity, kicked it until the display flickered to life, and assessed the readings. Good news. The evacuation tube is still intact according to these sensors. Bad news. The path to it goes through the primary coolant exchange, which is currently sitting at 400 degrees and climbing. We'd cooked before we got halfway through. Unless we can vent some of that heat first. He looked at me with an expression of modified surprise, as if he had not quite expected military hardware to be capable of structural engineering. There's an emergency release valve somewhere in this chamber. If we can access it, find it. We worked together to clear the debris that had buried the release mechanism, me providing leverage, Marcus providing dexterity, both of us racing against a timeline that felt increasingly personal. When Marcus finally got his hands on the controls, he worked with the focused speed of someone who understood exactly what they were dealing with. Superheated steam vented upward through emergency ducts. The temperature in the chamber dropped in stages, like a fever breaking. "There," Marcus said, leaning back on his heels with something that was not quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. "Now we just have to cross 50 meters of very angry metal without touching anything that will char us into ash. Should be straightforward." I found myself watching him as we prepared to cross. This small, grease-stained human with his battered toolbox and his running commentary and his absolute refusal to behave like someone in mortal danger. Something was shifting in my chest. Some long-held assumption was developing cracks. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, when we had made the crossing and reached the evacuation tube access. My voice was quieter than I intended. "Why risk your life for me? Valorians and humans are barely even trade partners. I am an enemy combatant who helped destroy your workplace." Marcus turned and looked at me with an expression I would spend years trying to properly describe. clear and direct and entirely without the calculations that usually accompany interactions between species with unequal standing in the galactic order. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Krenth," he said. "You see categories. Valorian, human, Crexith, ally, enemy, worthy, unworthy. I just see a person, and I don't leave people to die alone if I can do anything about it." A pause. "I never have. I don't plan to start today." The evacuation tube waited ahead of us, a vertical shaft rising toward the surface and survival. Marcus pried open the access hatch, and we both looked inside at the same moment. The shaft was half filled with collapsed debris. The ladder had been sheared away entirely. The walls were scorched black, and from somewhere far above, the unmistakable sound of escaping atmosphere told a story of catastrophic structural failure. "Well," Marcus said, after a long moment of silence, "that's not ideal. That's our only way out. Our only conventional way out." He was already moving, heading back into the geothermal chamber with his toolbox swinging at his side. But I didn't spend 8 years maintaining this rust bucket without learning every unconventional exit it has. I caught his shoulder and spun him around with more force than I intended. The question I asked came out harder than I meant it to, sharpened by pain and fear and something else I didn't have a name for yet. You knew the evacuation tube was damaged before we came down here." He met my gaze without flinching. "Yeah. Then why?" "Because the alternative route requires going through Sector 9. His voice was level. "And Sector 9 currently has a handful of Crexith fighters who didn't evacuate with their comrades. They are trapped down here same as us. They are angry, and they have weapons and nothing to lose. I was hoping the tube would be usable." A slight pause. I was wrong. The pieces arranged themselves. The medical kit that had appeared too quickly. The practice efficiency of his movements. The fact that he had been here at all in an active combat zone during what should have been civilian evacuation. "You didn't come back for a calibrator," I said slowly. "You came back for the distress signal." "My distress signal." He looked away for a moment. "Your armor broadcasts on civilian emergency frequencies. I heard the beacon from the evacuation assembly point. Thought maybe someone needed help." He said it simply, without drama, the way you might describe deciding to take an umbrella because the sky looked uncertain. "Marcus." I stopped, reorganized what I wanted to say. "You ran back into an active combat zone because you heard a distress beacon from someone you didn't know." The silence stretched for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, and the easy deflection of his usual tone was absent. 3 years ago," he said, "I spent 6 months in a Crexith labor camp. They raided the transit station where I was working. Took 40 of us. Locked us in holding cells while they waited to ransom us or sell us or just decide what to do with us." He stopped, started again. "Nobody came. Not the Imperium. Not the Coalition. Not any of the people who could have made a difference. We waited and we waited, and we kept telling each other that someone was coming, that someone had heard, that someone gave enough of a damn about a group of civilian contractors to send help." His jaw was tight. 19 of us made it out alive. We got out ourselves, eventually, through an opportunity that came at cost I won't describe right now. The rest, he stopped, the rest died waiting. The geothermal chamber hummed and groaned around us. Something deep in the facility gave way with a sound like distant thunder. So when I hear distress beacon, Marcus said, I answer it, every time, because I can't fix what happened to my crew. I can't go back and be the person who showed up when it mattered. But I can be that person now, every time the opportunity presents itself, for as long as I'm alive to do it. I had no words. Every framework I had been given for understanding the galaxy, every hierarchy, every taxonomy of worthiness, every joke I had laughed at in officers' briefings, lay quietly in pieces around me, and I was not yet ready to begin rebuilding. I'm sorry, I said, for what happened to your crew. I'm sorry. Save it for when we're not about to die, he said, and the brisk practicality of it was somehow more meaningful than ceremony would have been. That was when the first plasma bolt screamed past my head. 3 Crexith fighters materialized from the shadows between the turbine housings, weapons up, voices raised in demands that my translator chip rendered into guttural imperatives. They looked exactly as Marcus had described. Trapped, furious, and entirely out of options except violence. Marcus yanked me down behind a turbine housing as energy blasts scorched the metal inches above us. The air filled with a sharp, chemical smell of superheated metal. "Any chance your military training covers this scenario?" he shouted over the weapons fire. I was operating on 30% combat effectiveness. No sidearm. A broken leg held together by polymer casting in desperate optimism. 3 armed hostiles who had every reason to shoot first and never ask questions. I was still Valorian. I was still a warrior of the Imperium. "The coolant tanks," I said. "Can you vent them?" Marcus stared at me. "That would flood this chamber with superheated steam." "We'd both." "Not if we seal ourselves in the equipment alcove first. The emergency shielding is rated for thermal events. It'll hold." A beat. A plasma bolt vaporized a section of turbine housing 6 inches from Marcus' head. He looked at me with an expression that seemed to be doing rapid, practical mathematics. "The control panel is 30 feet away," he said. "On the other side of 3 people trying to kill us. I'll draw their fire. You have a broken leg." "I'm aware." Another beat. "The shielding better hold," he said, and moved. He bolted for the control panel in a low, fast sprint, staying close to the equipment, using the turbine housing for cover. I rode from behind my own shelter and made myself visible, made myself loud, roaring challenges at the Crexith fighters in their own language, drawing every weapon toward me. My broken leg screamed with each step. I ignored it. Pain was information. Pain was survivable. The alternative was not. 2 plasma bolts hit my armor in quick succession. I felt the ceramic plating buckle and crack, felt the heat bleed through to my scales. A 3rd bolt grazed my shoulder, and I spun with it, using the momentum, keeping my feet. The Crexith fighters saw Marcus at the controls. They shifted aim. I stopped calculating. I simply moved. The distance between us collapsed. I hit Marcus from the side, wrapping my body around him, feeling the plasma bolts that had been meant for him strike my back instead. 2, 3, impact that drove the air from my lungs and sent fresh cracks spreading through my compromised armor. We hit the alcove entrance together, and Marcus, even now, even with my weight bearing him down, had the presence of mind to slam his fist down on the emergency release as we fell through the opening. The coolant tanks ruptured with a sound that I can only describe as the voice of catastrophe, a bass roar that shook the walls and rose instantly into a scream of pressurized steam. The entire chamber disappeared behind a white wall of superheated vapor. Through the narrow gap before the alcove shielding engaged, I saw the Crexith fighters turn toward the sound. 1 second, 2, and then the wave reached them. The shielding came down. The temperature inside the alcove climbed anyway. Not lethal. Not quite. Marcus and I pressed into the furthest corner while the thermal event raged outside, and we did not speak, because there was nothing to say and because speaking required air and air was a resource in limited supply. I could feel heat radiating from the walls. Could feel my own pulse in the fractures of my damaged armor. After a time that felt much longer than it probably was, the worst of it passed. "You saved my life," Marcus said. His voice was rough with heat and exhaustion. "You saved mine first," I replied. I was returning the favor. He managed a weak, genuine smile in the red-tinted dimness of the alcove. "Guess we're even." "No," I said, and I meant it completely. "We're brothers." The rescue teams found us 6 hours later. I remember the extraction in fragments, the blessed shock of cooler air, the faces of human medics appearing above me with expressions of focused concern, the sensation of being lifted and carried and finally, being still. Marcus was conscious throughout, directing the medics with the same calm practicality he had applied to everything else, answering their questions about our injuries with accurate, organized detail while they worked. When I woke 3 days later in the medical frigate orbiting Epsilon 7, my leg was encased in a regeneration sleeve and Commander Thresh was standing at the foot of my bed. His expression told me everything before he spoke a word. "Welcome back, Krenth," he said, with a particular careful neutrality. "You were recovered alongside a human civilian, a maintenance worker who claims to have rescued you from the facility." "Everything he claims is accurate," I said. "He saved my life. Multiple times, and I intend to ensure that fact is documented in every report up to and including testimony before High Command if necessary." Something moved across Thresh's face, a complex emotion that combined discomfort, political calculation, and something very close to pity. Think carefully about how you proceed. Such testimony would reflect poorly on the Crimson Talons, on the Imperium itself. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to simply note that you survive against difficult odds and lie, I said. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to lie. The silence between us had a particular quality, the kind that exists when two people both understand that a choice is being made that cannot be unmade. That's not what I would recommend, Thresh said carefully. Then we don't share a recommendation, I replied. I testified before the assembled generals and admirals of the Valorian High Command 17 days after the Epsilon 7 operation. I told them everything. Every detail of the fall, the injury, the abandonment, every moment of Marcus Webb's resourcefulness and courage. The maintenance tunnels he knew by memory, the coolant tanks he vented, the way he had appeared in that corridor, not by accident, not on his way to retrieve a tool, but because he had heard a distress signal broadcasting on civilian frequencies and had turned around, walked back into a war zone, and decided that a stranger's life was worth more than his own safety. I watched their faces as I spoke. I watched the scales darken with displeasure, the careful blankness of leaders who had been presented with an inconvenient truth delivered in front of witnesses and cameras, and the unblinking eye of the official record. They could not refute the facts. My armor's black box had survived the entire ordeal intact, and its recordings left nothing open to interpretation. The story spread, first through military channels, whispered in training halls and officers' clubs with a mixture of admiration and discomfort that told me more about the Valorian military's relationship with its own values than any official doctrine ever had. Then beyond, into the wider networks of galactic communication where humans, who had always known that their species was capable of more than the galaxy credited them for, received it as something between vindication and celebration. The tale of Krenth and Marcus, the warrior and the mechanic, the soldier who was abandoned and the civilian who came back. My reassignment came through official channels 2 weeks later. Training command, far from active operations, teaching fresh recruits the fundamentals of tactics and honor and the obligations of warriors to one another. The order was framed as recognition of my experience. Everyone understood what it actually was. I accepted it without complaint. And in every lecture I gave, to every cohort of young warriors who filed into my training halls with their bright eyes and their fresh certainties, I told them Marcus' story. I made sure they understood, not as an abstraction, not as a lesson about human capability, but as a direct and personal account of what it means to truly not leave someone behind. 6 months after Epsilon 7, Marcus came to visit. He arrived looking exactly as I remembered him. Same grease-stained jumpsuit, same battered toolbox, same weathered face carrying the weight of someone who has seen enough of the galaxy to develop opinions about it. But something was different in the way the younger warriors looked at him as he walked through the training facility. Attention, curiosity, a kind of instinctive recognition. We walked the facility ground together in the low light of the training complex's artificial evening, talking about everything and nothing, the way people talk when they have survived something together that created a kind of shorthand between them, a shared grammar for the world. I heard about the promotion. I said, Safety Director for the entire mining guild. Substantial achievement. Turns out nearly dying in a collapsing facility while conducting an unauthorized rescue operation looks surprisingly good on a resume. He grinned, and it was the same grin from the alcove, real and slightly exhausted and entirely unperformed. Plus, I'd be making some noise about evacuation protocols. Turns out when someone with a story like ours starts arguing that civilian workers deserve more than 20 minutes warning before military operations commence in their workplace, people listen. The Guild is pushing it through legislative channels. Things are changing, Krenth. Slowly, but they are. That matters, I said, and I meant it in a way that would have been incomprehensible to the version of myself who had stepped into an insertion pod above Epsilon 7. That matters more than most of the things I spent my career fighting for. We stopped at the edge of the training grounds, looking out over the landing pads where ships came and went in the endless commerce of the galaxy. For a while, neither of us spoke. You know what I keep coming back to. Marcus said eventually, it's not the tactics or the close calls or the part where the steam almost killed us. It's the simpler thing underneath all of it. The reason any of it happened. He paused, turning the thought over like a maintenance chief examining a component is trying to understand. Showing up, that's what it comes down to. Doing the right thing when it's hard, when it costs something, when nobody would blame you for walking away. His voice was quiet now, carrying the particular weight of someone who has learned a thing the hard way and never forgotten it. That's not a human characteristic, and it's not a Valorian one. It's just the best that any person can be, regardless of species, regardless of what the galaxy tells them they're supposed to be. I thought about a maintenance worker in a grease-stained jumpsuit, turning back toward the sound of a distress beacon when every rational instinct would have demanded retreat. I thought about what it had cost him and what it had given him and what it had eventually given me. That's not just humanity, I said. That's not even heroism. Exactly, though it's that too. I searched for the right words and found them, finally, in the simplest possible place. That's what it looks like when someone decides who they're going to be, and then is that person, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Oh," he said, with a ghost of a smile, "maybe I'm just too stubborn to know when to quit." "Those might be the same thing," I said. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that costs nothing and means everything. And we stood there in the comfortable silence of two people who had been through the fire together and come out the other side, changed, marked, and in possession of something that the Valorian Imperium had never issued as standard equipment. The knowledge of what we owed each other. The knowledge of what we owed everyone. The galaxy is changing. I watch it from my training hall, year after year, as cohort after cohort of young warriors file in with their certainties and file out with something more complicated and more valuable, the understanding that honor is not a rank or citation or species. It's a choice you make, in corridors full of smoke and fire, when no one who matters is watching and every rational calculation says to leave. Marcus Webb made that choice for a stranger who would have dismissed him as beneath consideration. I try, every day, to be worthy of it. Some days, I think I'm getting closer. You want to know about pride? Sit down. Let me tell you what pride actually costs. My name is Krenth Val Mortis, third-ranked blade champion of the Valorian Imperium, survivor of the Kelrose campaigns, bearer of 7 combat citations, each one earned in blood and fire. I have stood on battlefields that would make lesser beings weep, faced enemies that the history archives still struggle to categorize, and walk away from engagements that claimed warriors twice my caliber. And I am also the decorated soldier who once collapsed against a crumbling support pillar, weaponless and broken, and begged a human for help. Yes, a human. Go ahead. Let that sink in. I used to think pride was armor. Something you wore. Something that protected you. Something that announced to the universe exactly who you were and what you were worth. The Valorian Imperium teaches you that from the moment your scales harden. Pride in your lineage. Pride in your rank. Pride in the simple, unassailable fact of being Valorian in a galaxy full of lesser things. We were the apex, the standard against which all other species were measured and found wanting. I was wrong about all of it, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me take you to Epsilon 7, where everything I thought I knew about honor was stripped away, layer by layer, in a collapsing mine at the edge of explored space. Epsilon 7 was, and I want to be generous here, an absolute pit. Even calling it a mining colony felt like an overstatement. It was a gray, toxic, barely habitable rock orbiting a dim star that seemed embarrassed to be associated with it. The atmosphere was a poisonous cocktail that required filtration equipment just to breathe. Temperatures swung from scalding to freezing in 16-hour cycles, as if the planet itself could not decide whether it preferred to burn you alive or freeze you solid. Dust coated everything, equipment, walkways, the inside of your lungs if you were careless, a fine, gray powder that tasted like metal shavings and regret. The mining installations looked like they had been assembled by a committee of engineers who had never met each other, working from 12 different sets of blueprints, all of which contradicted each other. Modules of mismatched design butted up against prefabricated corridors. Support struts of incompatible alloys had been welded together with what appeared to be desperate optimism rather than structural calculation. Cables ran in tangles along every available surface. Knowing humans, the installation had probably been built exactly that way, not from incompetence, but from sheer relentless improvisation, the instinct to make something work regardless of how it was supposed to work. Our intelligence report identified the facility as a staging ground for the Crexith rebellion, a splinter faction of radical extremists who had somehow convinced themselves that stolen weapons and righteous fury were sufficient to challenge the mightiest empire in 4 galaxies. They were wrong. They were always wrong. The Crexith had been wrong 14 times in the past rotation cycle alone, and my squad had personally corrected their misapprehension on 9 of those occasions. My squad, the Crimson Talons. Even now, saying that name feels complicated, a mixture of pride and something bitter that I have never quite found the right word for. But then, on the transport down toward Epsilon 7, the name still filled me with uncomplicated fire. We were the finest rapid assault unit in the fleet. 12 warriors, all of them decorated, all of them tested, all of them bound to each other by years of shared danger and shared victory. Commander Thresh had joked during the briefing that we would be done before the humans' lunch break ended. We had all laughed. Even me. We should have known better. In hindsight, the arrogance of that laughter is almost painful to recall. The insertion was flawless. Our drop pods punched through Epsilon 7's atmosphere like molten daggers, barely shuddering despite the turbulence, and I watched my tactical display light up with 12 green indicators as we landed in perfect formation around the primary complex. Textbook execution. My chest swelled with a particular warmth of professional pride, the satisfaction of a unit operating exactly as it had been designed to operate. The mining complex itself was a labyrinth of prefabricated corridors and processing chambers connected by a network of tunnels bored deep into the asteroid crust. The lighting was terrible. Humans, it seemed, preferred to work in conditions that resembled a cave dwelling, relying on strips of amber emergency lighting that cast more shadow than illumination. The air recyclers wheezed and rattled, struggling to process the atmosphere, producing a sound like a very old, very sick animal trying to breathe. Everything smelled of metal shavings, engine coolant, and the particular staleness of recycled air that has been recycled one too many times. We split into 3 teams at the primary junction. I led Team Razor, 5 of our best, through the Eastern Corridor complex. The plan was clean and simple. Sweep and clear, neutralize resistance, collect available intelligence, and extract. Standard suppression protocols. The kind of operation the Crimson Talons had conducted dozens of times without losing a single warrior. We moved like shadows through those dim corridors. Weapons raised, sensors sharpened to a fine edge, every footstep placed with deliberate precision. The explosion came from below. Not ahead, not behind. Below, the Crexith had rigged the entire sublevel with mining charges, the industrial kind, designed to crack open mineral veins 30 meters thick. The floor did not so much collapse as simply cease to exist, vaporizing beneath my feet in a roar of orange fire and shrieking metal. One moment I was signaling my team forward with a crisp 2-fingered gesture. The next I was falling through a churning cloud of smoke and debris, tumbling end over end, watching fragments of shattered flooring spin past me like a storm of broken teeth. I hit the lower level hard enough to feel it in my spine. Something in my left leg made a sound like a dry branch snapping, a clean, almost delicate crack that was entirely at odds with the white-hot agony that followed it. My armor's trauma systems responded immediately, flooding my bloodstream with pain suppressants, but they were fighting a losing battle. I could feel the grinding wrongness of bone against bone. Through a crack in my shattered armor plating, I could see the unnatural angle of my shin, and for a moment, the professional, battle-hardened part of my mind simply catalogued the damage with clinical detachment before the rest of me caught up and made its feelings known. The pain was extraordinary. Through the smoke and the ringing in my skull, I could hear the sounds of engagement above me, the sharp crack of plasma bolts, the rhythmic percussion of kinetic rounds, the distinctive high whine of Crexith energy weapons answering back. My team was fighting. My team was alive. But I could not reach them, could not stand, could barely breathe through the waves of agony radiating up from my shattered leg. My communicator screamed with static. I pressed my fingers against my helmet's MIC with desperate focus. Team Razor requesting extraction. Officer down. Multiple fractures. Coordinates transmitting.